You could feel it building game after game, like something real was finally taking shape in Los Angeles. This wasn't just a team winning games in March. It was a group starting to look like it understood exactly what it needed to be when the lights get brighter. 15 wins in 17 games, one of the most efficient offenses in the league, and a climb all the way into that third seed. Inside the building, there was a quiet confidence growing that this version of the Lakers might actually have something dangerous in them, and a big part of that feeling came from Luka Doncic, playing at a level that forced the entire league to pay attention. Night after night, he wasn't just putting up numbers, he was controlling games, dictating pace, bending defenses until something broke. You could see how everything opened up around him. The spacing looked cleaner, decisions came quicker, and suddenly this roster that had been questioned months ago started to make sense in a way it hadn't before. But then that night in Oklahoma City hit like a cold reality check. What was supposed to be a statement game turned into something nobody inside the Lakers' locker room expected. From the opening minutes, things didn't feel right. Defensive rotations were late, shots weren't falling, and the energy that carried them through March just wasn't there. By the time it got out of hand, it wasn't just a loss, it was the kind that stays with a team. And in the middle of that, everything shifted when Doncic reached for the back of his leg and walked off. You could feel the tension immediately. No one needed an official report to understand that this wasn't minor. When the diagnosis came out later, a grade 2 hamstring strain, the conversation around this team changed overnight, not just for the next game, but for everything that was supposed to come after. Because here's the part people around the league keep circling back to. This entire structure, everything that had started to click, was built around what Luka brings every single possession. Without that presence, the spacing shrinks, the reads get harder, and the margin for error disappears. It's not just about replacing points, it's about replacing control, and that's something you don't just plug into a lineup. That's why there's real concern now about what this team looks like when the postseason begins. The third seed is still there, the record still says contender, but the reality feels different. And if you've followed this franchise long enough, you know expectations don't change just because circumstances do. That jersey carries something heavier than that. Right, championship standard if you believe the Lakers should always be chasing the top. What makes this even more complicated is what this moment was supposed to answer. This stretch wasn't just about winning games. It was about learning who this team really is under pressure, who creates when things slow down, who steps forward when defenses lock in. And now, those answers are suddenly a lot harder to find. And that brings everything into sharper focus with Austin Reeves. He was right in the middle of a season that felt like a real jump, not just statistically, but in how he was being defended and trusted. The kind of year that changes how the league looks at you. But the reality is, his impact has always been tied, at least in part, to the attention Luka draws. Because when Doncic is out there, defenses don't have the luxury of locking in on anyone else. Reeves finds gaps, gets cleaner looks, makes plays against rotations that are already stressed. Take that away, and suddenly the game asks something very different from him. Now, he's the one being targeted, the one defenses build around stopping. And as if things weren't already complicated enough, that situation took another hit. Reeves dealing with his own injury, another grade 2 strain, this time in the oblique, and now the timeline starts to look uncomfortable. Early projections pointing to weeks, not days, and suddenly the idea of both primary creators missing time at the start of the playoffs becomes very real. That's where the pressure shifts completely, because now it's not about fine-tuning rotations or finding rhythm. It's about survival. It's about figuring out in real time who can handle more, who can stay composed, and how this team can still function when the two players who shaped everything offensively aren't there. Comment Los Angeles expects more if you believe this team should never settle for less than contention. And right in the middle of all this, there's one constant that hasn't changed. LeBron James. You've seen this story before in different forms, but it doesn't make it any less significant now. Even at this stage, he's still capable of stepping into moments like this and giving the team something to hold on to. That recent triple-double wasn't just numbers, it was a message that there's still structure here, still leadership, still a reason to believe this won't completely fall apart. But even with that, the questions aren't going anywhere, because asking him to carry everything, especially over a full playoff series, is a different conversation. This is where the rest of the roster gets tested in a way that regular season games don't replicate. Roles expand, responsibilities shift, and players who were comfortable in defined spots suddenly have to do more. If you love following the Lakers and everything around this team, subscribe now, because we cover every story that matters. And internally, this final stretch of games now means something completely different. It's not about momentum anymore. It's about evaluation under pressure. Who can handle extended minutes? Who can create something when the offense breaks down? Who can be trusted when possessions actually matter? Because make no mistake, what happens next isn't just about this postseason. There are bigger decisions coming. Contracts, roster direction, long-term identity, and the playoffs were supposed to give clarity on all of that. Instead, the front office might be forced to make those calls without ever seeing the full version of what this team was supposed to be. And that's where this situation starts to feel bigger than just injuries. It becomes about timing, about missed opportunities, about a team that looked ready to answer real questions, suddenly being left in a position where those answers might never fully come. Right? Law still believes, if you trust the Lakers can rise when the pressure gets real. Because now, everything shifts to what they do next. What happens in these next few days is going to tell you a lot more than anything we saw in March. This is where rotations get stretched, where decisions aren't comfortable, and where coaching adjustments stop being theory and start becoming survival tools. J.J. Redick now has to rebuild parts of this offense almost from scratch. Not because he wants to, but because the situation demands it. The immediate response from the organization already shows how serious this has become. Calling up LeBron James and Dalton Knecht isn't just about adding bodies. It's about trying to find any spark that can translate under pressure. Knecht has been producing at a high level in the G League, showing scoring instincts and energy that could earn him real minutes. But there's a clear gap between potential and playoff reality, and the Lakers know that better than anyone. At the same time, the responsibility on the veterans quietly increases. Rui Hachimura, Marcus Smart, players who have already carved out their roles, now have to expand them without losing efficiency. That balance is difficult. Do too much and you lose what made you reliable. Do too little and the offense stalls. That's the line this team is walking right now. And then there's the schedule. No soft landing, no room to ease into adjustments. Every remaining game carries weight, not just for seeding, but for identity. The Lakers aren't just trying to win, they're trying to understand who they are without their main engines. That's a different kind of pressure, one that exposes everything quickly. If you've been around this franchise long enough, you recognize moments like this. The expectations don't lower, the noise doesn't quiet down, and the standard remains exactly where it has always been. That's what makes this situation feel so heavy. It's not just about injuries, it's about whether this group can respond in a way that fits what this jersey represents. Right, the banners tell the story, if you believe the history of this franchise still matters today. There's also something else building in the background that people aren't talking about enough. Opportunity. Not in the comfortable sense, but in the kind that forces players into roles they didn't expect to have this soon. Sometimes that reveals something real. Sometimes it confirms limitations. Either way, it gives clarity, and right now, clarity might be the most valuable thing this team can get before the postseason begins. You can already see the tone shifting around the league. A team that looked like it could make real noise is now being questioned in ways that didn't exist a week ago. That's how fast things change at this level. And inside that locker room, they're fully aware of it. This is exactly why, if you've been following everything closely, now is the moment you don't want to miss what comes next. Because these next updates aren't going to be surface-level reactions, they're going to reveal who actually steps forward when expectations don't disappear, they get heavier. If you haven't locked in with the channel yet, this is the point where you stay ahead of everything that's about to unfold, because what happens from here is going to move fast. And as all of this builds, one question keeps hanging over everything. Not about seeding, not about matchups, but about resilience. About whether this group can find something within itself that wasn't supposed to be needed this early. Comment, never count out the Lake Show if you know this team is always one move away from changing everything. Because now, every possession, every adjustment, every decision starts to carry a different kind of weight. And when the game starts to feel like that, you begin to see who actually understands the moment and who just gets caught in it. The Lakers are stepping into a stretch where execution matters more than talent, where discipline replaces rhythm, and where every small mistake gets amplified. That's usually where playoff identities are formed, but for this group, it's happening earlier than expected. One detail that keeps coming up internally is pace. Without their primary creators, the Lakers can't afford to play rushed basketball. Possessions have to be cleaner, decisions more deliberate, and spacing needs to be respected at all times. That requires communication, trust, and something this roster is still trying to stabilize under pressure. It's not just about who scores, it's about how they generate anything sustainable. LeBron's role becomes even more strategic here, not just as a scorer or facilitator, but as someone who controls tempo and reads situations before they unfold. You can already see him picking his moments more carefully, conserving energy, choosing when to push and when to slow everything down. That level of control is rare, and right now, it's essential. But even with that presence, there's an underlying reality that can't be ignored. This team was designed with a certain balance in mind. Remove two key pieces from that structure, and everything else shifts. Defensive matchups change, rotations shorten, and the margin for adjustments becomes thinner. That's why these final games aren't just preparation, they're exposure. And the closer it gets to the postseason, the more that tension builds. Because once that first game tips off, there are no more experiments. Everything counts immediately. Every lineup, every substitution, every late-game decision. That's where experience helps, but it doesn't solve everything. Right built for the bright lights, if you believe the Lakers respond when the spotlight is strongest. There's also a mental side to all of this that doesn't show up in stat sheets. A team that was riding momentum now has to reset emotionally, and that's not simple. Confidence gets tested, roles feel less secure, and uncertainty creeps in. The teams that handle that shift well usually stay competitive longer than expected. The ones that don't tend to fade quickly. And that's why what happens behind closed doors matters just as much as what we see on the court. Film sessions get sharper, conversations get more honest, and accountability becomes unavoidable. This is where leadership isn't about words, it's about presence. If you're really paying attention, this is the phase where you start catching details most people miss. Adjustments that hint at what the coaching staff actually trusts. Lineups that quietly reveal who's earning minutes. Trends that point to how this team plans to survive when everything tightens. This is exactly why staying connected right now isn't optional if you care about where this is heading. Because the next developments won't be obvious at first glance, but they will define how far this team can actually go. Subscribing here means you're not reacting late. You're understanding things as they unfold, before the narrative fully shifts. Comment, this story is far from over if you think there is still another big chapter waiting for this team. Because the truth is, this situation is still unfolding, and what comes next might change everything again. If you're part of Lakers Nation and you want to follow every chapter of this team's story, subscribe now. And there's a feeling right now that this group hasn't shown everything yet, even with everything that's gone wrong. Sometimes adversity forces clarity, and the Lakers are being pushed into that space whether they're ready or not. The next response won't come from systems or adjustments alone. It's going to come from who's willing to step into uncomfortable responsibility when there's no safety net left. That's what makes this stretch so revealing. Not the score lines, but the reactions. Not the narratives, but the details. Because in Los Angeles, you don't get remembered for how things look when everything is working. You get remembered for what you do when it isn't. Right, Lakers pride. If you have supported this team through every era. If you want to stay ahead of every shift, every decision, and every move that could redefine this team, make sure you're subscribed right now. This is where the real story starts to take shape, and you don't want to be catching up after it's already changed.